Well, good evening, everybody who has joined us. My name is Dr. Woodward. I am the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning here in Pleasanton, and I'm very grateful to have everyone here this evening, including our panelists and everyone who is joining us as an attendee. So before we get started with our Equity Town Hall, I'd like to introduce members of the Executive Cabinet, starting with our Superintendent, Dr. David Haglund. And we have our Assistant Superintendent of Business Services, Amit Sheikhoslami. Our Assistant Superintendent of Student Support Services, Ed Dialazzo. Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Julio Hernandez. And then we'll be sharing the mic this evening with several people who will have a part in our presentation. So Namarta Grewal, Director of Secondary Education. Shay Galetti, Director of Elementary Education. Kara Johnson, Language Acquisition Coordinator. Soraya Villasenor, Coordinator of Equity and Access. Dr. Pam Vandekamp, Director of Assessment and Accountability. Dr. Amos Nugent III, Director of Career Readiness and Adult Education. Dr. Corbis, the Assistant Director of Adult Education. And two of our fine principals are with us this evening. We've got Principal Fields from Hart Middle School. And then we have Principal Butterfield from Amador Valley High School. And of course, behind the scenes, we have Patrick Gannon, who is helping us with all things related to technology. And we have Silvana Goretz, who will be translating in Spanish. For anyone who needs it. Silvana, go ahead, please.
Sure. Les da la bienvenida a todos. Ha presentado a todos los miembros del panel de esta noche. Y para aquellos que necesiten la interpretación al español, por favor, escojan en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Van a tener la opción de hacer clic en lo que parece ser un globo terráqueo, un globo, y eso es para escoger la interpretación al español. Gracias.
Thank you. And we have Michael who's interpreting for us this evening in Mandarin. Michael, go ahead.
你好，欢迎各位参加我们 Pleasanton 学区的今晚的社区论坛。本人在此提供这个同步中文翻译。只要你使用 iPhone 或 iPad 的话呢，你荧幕上右上角有个3个点，请按强力出来就可以享用同步中文翻译。只要使用手提电脑或线上电脑的话呢，在地球下面那一排有个地球仪，你按地球仪的时候按强力出来，也可以使用同步中文翻译。谢谢。
Thank you, Michael. Welcome to our Equity Town Hall. We are going to this evening provide our community with an overview of our why behind equity and our goals pertaining to equitable practices that include diversity, inclusion, and provide you with an overview of some of the specific projects that are underway that will result in better outcomes for all of our students, especially those who have experienced barriers that have impeded their success. At this point in time, I'd like to ask that our slide deck be shared on the screen, please. And Mr. Gannon, if you would kindly also put the slide deck in the chat so that our attendees can access this afterwards, that would be great. Perfect. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started with our next slide. Let's take a minute to look back a few years about some key commitments that were made by our school district that pertain to equity and diversity. In 2015-16, the Board of Trustees adopted an equity and diversity resolution. Linked in this slide deck is the entire document. And when one reads the first two paragraphs, stand out as to what equity means and why PUSD places such value on ensuring equitable learning experiences for every student. I will read the first two paragraphs out loud to reiterate our commitment to these principles. Whereas the strength and richness of our community is in its diversity, the Board of Trustees affirms its commitment to continuing the district's systemic efforts to build a society free of hatred, bigotry, and racism. Whereas equity and equality are not interchangeable terms. The concept of educational equity goes beyond formal equality. where all students are treated the same, to fostering a barrier-free environment in which all students, regardless of background, have the opportunity to benefit equally. We believe that equity must be measured by outcomes and access. Thank you. Our organizational goals drive the work in every division of our school district. Equity is embedded into each of the 5 organizational goals. In particular, goals 1 and 3 are where we will focus this evening. Goal 1 states to leverage personalized, that means for each and every child, learning strategies and growth-based assessments to increase achievement and to identify opportunity gaps, specifically links to equity. And goal 3 states, understand the systemic barriers to equity and inclusion and work strategically to deconstruct them. These 2 goals call out the need to look at every student by name, by need, and identify where we have gaps for our student groups in terms of discipline and achievement data. This is a slide from Nicole Anderson and Associates Consulting LLC. We'll also refer to them tonight as NAC, which demonstrates the overarching ideas that we need to consider. As previously stated, we need to align our understanding of what equity means, including giving our students what they need when they need it, while understanding that some students need more than others. It also means that we must recognize that students demonstrate success in different ways, and we must make intentional efforts to shift mindset, policy, and interrupt systemic inequities. Having said that, we do face challenges in this work, many of which are reflected in historical practices, embedded into our curriculum, hidden in implicit bias or stereotypes, and are a result of institutional racism in an ever-changing educational system. Therefore, very specific actions are needed to change policy, practice, and increase opportunities, to shift resources and mental models, and implement culturally relevant curriculum and build cultural competencies for our educators, while also building respectful relationships with all stakeholders, including marginalized students, families, and those that have experienced exclusion due to disabilities. So what do we want to accomplish? We have a number of goals related to promoting a culture in PUSD that highly values diversity, equity, and inclusive practices. These are a few of our goals for this year, starting with ensuring that Ed Code and equity serve as drivers for board policy and administrative regulations, and they also guide professional development activities. Therefore, we need to identify and revise policies and practices that contribute to inequities, build capacity within our organization to address equity issues at all levels, including ongoing professional development support for PUSD staff. We know that we need to address racism, marginalization of student groups, and eliminate microaggressions, and determine additional processes and actions to close access and opportunity gaps as part of an ongoing developing equity plan. And of course, very importantly, to engage students, families, and staff as thought partners as we move forward to capture the voices of our community. It is important that we keep our community informed about the equity-related work that is already underway. So we're going to give you this evening an overview of various forms of data that indicate the urgency of closing the achievement gap and creating a supportive culture and climate on our campuses. As well, we want to update you on how our equity consultant, Nicole Anderson and Associates Consulting, NAC, is working with members of our PUSD team. You will hear about our early literacy initiative at the elementary level, grading for equity at the middle and high schools, how our career technical education program is expanding their outreach to be more inclusive, how our adult education program is equipping our Pleasanton adults with 21st century skills that will serve our children and our community well. And you will hear from two of our principals who are leading this work at their sites. Finally, we will share about our diversity, equity, and inclusion task force that will be forming and how our English language learners, also called emerging bilinguals, will be supported. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Pam Vandekamp, Director of Assessment and Accountability, who will walk us through some various data points.
Thank you, Dr. Woodward. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I'd like to share a little bit of our data that shows the gaps that exist between all students and our students who are students of color or who might have other situations, such as students who are experiencing low income, our students who are emerging bilinguals, and our students of our different races. So if you look at the data here, we can see how students make up the total of our student population on the left. And then within this group, the students who are experiencing certain conditions, such as our students with disabilities. Within our school community, 9.6% of our students have some type of disability, and they are supported through the individual education plan. And in comparison, if we look at our students who are Hispanic or Latino or African American, Asian, and our students who are white, we see that there are disparities among those percentages. Again, our students percentage within the population of students who were suspended. Overall, within our community, 1.8% of our students have been suspended one or more times, and this is in 2019-2020. And then you can see the disparities across our students of color and our students of different races. Again, within the percentage within the population who graduate from our high schools, 97.2% overall meet the requirements and are able to graduate. And you can see the discrepancies and the differences, the disproportionality among our students of different races. And finally, the percentage within our population who meet those requirements, that what we call the A to G requirements, which means that they are prepared for admittance to the University of California or a California State University. 73% of our students overall are prepared to meet those requirements. And you can see again the disparities among students of different races within our community. And so what we want is for all students to be able to meet those UC A to G requirements, to be able to graduate, and also to have their needs met. And so we want to be able to address these discrepancies, these disparities in our equity work. If we look at our achievement data, this is from our fall MAP growth administration. So measures of academic progress for students in grades 3 through 8 in reading and 2 through 8 in math. If we look at here again, we can see how our students who are at the high achieving and high average and high level of achievement as measured by this assessment are different depending on how students identify by race. And we see the discrepancies between, for example, our Black and African American students who are achieving at 22.96, almost 23% in that high achieving band. And then as compared with our students who identify as Asian, where that band is at 57.83%. So we see the differences. If we look at our fall achievement for math, we see similar discrepancies. For example, our students who are Hispanic, we see almost 11% are in that high achieving percentile band as compared with our white students who are 33.24% in the achievement band. And so what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Director Galetti, who will talk about significant disproportionality in special education.
Thank you, Dr. Vandekamp. I would like to build off the data you just shared in order to explain significant disproportionality in special education. The California Department of Education monitors the number of students by race and ethnicity who qualify for special education. Based on total student enrollment, when a specific student group is overrepresented in special education consecutively for 3 years, the CDE determines the district is significantly disproportionate. PUSD has been deemed significantly disproportionate in the identification of our Hispanic Latinx students qualifying for special education under specific learning disability. Currently, we are also disproportionate, meaning less than 3 years, in the following areas: overall disability for American Indian students, autism for African American students, and discipline for African American students. When a district has been deemed significant, a programmatic improvement plan is initiated to uncover the root causes and correct the disproportionalities. The program of improvement is called the Comprehensive Coordinated Early Intervening Services, or CSACE. It is a 4-phase improvement process in which a leadership team and stakeholder group is formed to review both qualitative and quantitative data in order to identify the root causes causing the disproportionality. Once the root causes are identified, activities are planned, implemented, and continually evaluated for effectiveness. The root causes of why we are over-identifying Hispanic Latinx students point to systemic practices that need to be addressed through our equity work. The root causes point to a lack of an integrated multi-tiered systems of support for students, cultural dissonance felt by our students of color, implicit bias resulting in inconsistent application of discipline procedures, and a lack of understanding of second language development, including minimal opportunities for authentic parent engagement. 15% of the monies the district receives for special education must be utilized in general education to implement the activities outlined in the CSACE plan. Each activity has been strategically woven into our overarching equity work. Dr. Woodward will now dive deeper into our equity work with the NAC consulting firm.
Thank you, Director Galetti. Last year, we conducted interviews with various equity consultants that had supported other districts in the equity work. In March of last year, the Board of Trustees approved an agreement with Nicole Anderson and Associates Consulting, LLC. This year, we engage with NAC weekly in some fashion with our consultants to discuss our progress, to discuss our planning steps, to seek feedback on equity-related issues that might arise that require urgent attention. As well, NAC is providing professional development for district and site leaders, as we will discuss on the next slide. Our approach is to equip and empower all of our school leaders, including our governance team, which is the Board of Trustees, executive cabinet, extended cabinet. This is a group that includes all managers from every division in our district, and site leaders. We want to equip all leaders with an understanding of what equity means and to grow in our ability to be able to utilize strategies and tools so that we can foster higher levels of learning and support for every student. So what does this look like in practice? It includes board equity workshops. We've had several already. We'll continue to hold more this year. Principal equity workshops, cultural proficiency discussions with district leaders and the Board of Trustees, and our principals and vice principals. In fact, we engaged in a wonderful cultural proficiency discussion today with Dr. Shelley Holt from NAC. And in the spring, we will have Nicole Anderson and Associates doing coaching with our secondary principals. Elementary Director Galletti will now provide us with an update on the importance of focusing on early literacy for our elementary students and how this relates to the equity work.
Thank you, Dr. Woodward. In order to close the achievement gap we are seeing in reading, teachers are being provided professional development in early literacy. The professional development is called LETTERS, which stands for Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling. This training meets the standards of the International Dyslexia Association and is an IDA accredited program. Reading is a fundamental skill that is required for success in all academic subject areas. By providing effective reading instruction, we are ensuring all students can learn and read and comprehend at high levels. This is a multi-year PD initiative and tied directly to our CSACE action plan. Our goal is to provide comprehensive, structured literacy training to all primary grade teachers that is consistent with research, in which students develop phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Training is being led by 4 of our PUSD elementary intervention specialists who have become certified trainers of LETTERS. This year is our first cohort, and it is comprised of 86 teachers representing all elementary schools and grade levels, including our Pleasanton Virtual Academy. In addition to this, 17 of our elementary administrators are participating in the LETTERS leadership training in order to continue this important work at their school sites. Next year, we will start an additional cohort, and we will continue until all primary teachers have been trained in LETTERS. I will now turn it over to the Secondary Director, Graywall, to talk about our Grading for Equity, PD.
Thank you, Shay. With regards to secondary grading practices, the collection and analysis of grades data during the pandemic and remote learning revealed many inequities in PUSD's system of grading and assessment, including varied and often conflicting views from teachers about the purpose of grades, discrepancies in grading scales and practices within departments and across school sites, failing grades for students due to issues of compliance rather than mastery of skills and content, inconsistent opportunities for students to retake assessments and demonstrate proficiency in a subject. And the analysis of grades data revealed that our underserved populations in particular experience inequitable outcomes. This includes students who are emerging bilinguals, students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged in special education, and those who are historically marginalized. Thus, in partnership with Joe Feldman of Crescendo Education Group, we have embarked on work with equitable grading practices in PUSD. Our purpose in introducing grading for equity professional development is to improve the accuracy, bias resistance, and motivation of grading practices for instructional improvement and to increase opportunities for student success, particularly for those who have been underserved in PUSD. Equitable grading work in progress in 2021-22 includes a district-wide introduction to equitable grading practices for all 450 secondary teachers, a cohort of 37 teachers who are involved in research and cycles of inquiry led by Joe Feldman's staff. This group is piloting equitable grading practices and gathering data about the impact on student outcomes, which will be shared next spring. Over 50 staff members are involved in either a facilitated or independent online grading for equity course led by our integration specialists, and many are also involved in an independent book study. Groups of teachers at all secondary sites are engaged in some standards-based grading work. All secondary sites are also engaged in identifying essential standards, which are tied to that same work. And another 15 teachers have expressed interest in joining a cycle of inquiry work group in the spring. Altogether, approximately 100 secondary teachers, or a little over 20% of middle and high school staff, are actively engaged in work related to equitable grading practices in 2021-22. The expected outcomes of this work, of the PD, that is, the professional development for teachers, are accurate, bias-resistant, motivational, and understandable grading and assessment practices that reflect and measure proficiency on course standards. qualitative and quantitative evidence of the value of more equitable grading practices, and stronger collaborative relationships among teachers with a greater sense of efficacy to influence student performance. Expected outcomes for students are to accurately describe expectations for their own academic outcomes, a greater sense of agency and efficacy about their own academic performance, and a stronger sense of belief in their own success and trust in their teachers. And for our district overall, the expected outcomes are less stressful and less competitive learning environments, coherent grading and assessment policies across the district, and improved conversations about student expectations for course standards mastery. Again, the goal is to ensure grades are accurate, bias resistant, and motivational to ensure academic success for all of our students. With this, I'd like to pass to our coordinator of language acquisition, Ms. Karen Johnson, who will share about supports for our emerging bilingual students.
Thank you, Namarda. Going back to one of the root causes for a disproportionality that Shay mentioned earlier, I would like to share some information about how we are increasing our capacity and understanding in the area of language acquisition. Just as we have students in our schools who are learning languages other than English, we have students in our schools who are learning English. We refer to these students as emerging bilingual students as a way of honoring and recognizing their home language and culture. In order to ensure that we are adequately supporting our emerging bilingual students, we needed to take a closer look at data for these students. Our data in this area reveals that many of our emerging bilingual students are not making adequate progress in their acquisition of English needed to be successful in other areas of learning. As a result of this, our emerging bilingual students also continue to perform below grade level in many areas. Knowing that every student who is learning a new language needs dedicated time to practice and study this language, students who are learning English receive daily targeted instruction in English. This targeted instruction is called Designated English Language Development, or DELD. Upon seeing and reflecting on the data mentioned previously, we knew we had to take steps to ensure that students learning English had access to the same levels of high quality instruction that our students learning other languages have. For this reason, we have partnered with EL Achieve, a company whose practices are based on years of language acquisition research to fully support our teachers in the delivery of high quality, targeted, and intentional ELD instruction. Our goal with this action is to increase the number of students who are making adequate growth and thus better able to access all parts of their education. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Amos Nugent III, our Director of Adult and Career Education, so that he can share with you some of the things his department has been doing to address inequities.
Thank you, Coordinator Johnson. I appreciate it. Our Career Technical Education Department has taken this work very seriously to ensure that the disparities that have already been illuminated at the beginning by Director Van de Kamp, but also persist in the career technical education arena, are addressed as well. Very similar to the data that was shared, the college and career readiness and graduation rates in terms of what apply to all students, but specifically when it comes to CTE performance measures such as completion rate, industry credentials, and even college credits earned. All of these measures and so many more were another source of disparate data where it showed our special population student groups, which include our emerging bilinguals or English learners, Hispanic, African American, and students with disabilities, were not achieving in the same manner as their counterparts. As a result, it became necessary for a CT equity task force to begin last year, really analyzing this data deeply so that we could then understand the root causes and establish solutions to address these. As you see here pictured, we adopted a framework developed by the National Association for Partnership and Equity that really took a close look at equity in the CTE STEM ecosystems so that we can move forward with addressing this and closing these gaps. An outcome of our work and engagement last semester was a CTE Equity Master Plan to guide our work over the next 3 years doing just this. Next slide, please. Specifically, as we think about the funding sources that drive our work in CTE, or career technical education, We have our federal funding known as Perkins, and we have our several sources of state funding known as Career Technical Education Incentive Grant and the K-12 Strong Workforce. All of these funding sources, not to mention just it being the right thing to do, really mandate that a greater focus on equity. So we're proud to say that so far this year in computer science at Amador Valley High School, the team there has really taken a very serious approach in terms of establishing equity cohorts that were specifically targeted to Latino students, African-American students, and coming soon girls, because each of these groups of students are significantly underrepresented in computer science, and the goal is to increase their presence so that we can improve their outcomes as well. Coming soon will be CTE-specific orientation days for freshman students across both of our comprehensive high schools, where in addition to reaching out to freshmen, reaching out specifically to these same special population groups of students and having sessions where they can sit down, be a part of groups with students who look like them to increase their participation and performance in career technical education. Subsequent to that, CTE showcases and career fairs, where we are intentionally bringing industry representatives from special population subgroups, our emerging bilingual professionals, our professionals from different ethnic groups who are successful in their careers, so that our current students can see people who look like them in these industries as a source of inspiration for pursuing these industries and knowing they can be successful as well. It was already discussed the grading for equity and standards-based grading work that is happening across all secondary. We are proud to announce that we have sectors of our CTE department who are engaged in that work as well. And then finally, just an ongoing commitment to outreach and engagement in a very targeted manner so we can close these gaps. To talk about even more what's happening with our adult school, I would like to introduce Dr. Crystal Corbis, our Assistant Director of Adult and Career Education.
Adult education in Pleasanton continues to provide programs for our students who need additional support to achieve their academic and/or career goals after leaving secondary education. Through our adult internship program, we provide internships for up to 10 students with intellectual and/or developmental disabilities. These internships occur in various district sites, as well as through a partnership with the Pleasanton Doubletree by Hilton Hotel. This work has led us to identify yet another group of students who would benefit from a pre-internship program to assist in acquiring soft skills to be successful in their transition to an internship program later. Our English as a Second Language program has focused this past semester on increasing parent engagement in their child's education through English literacy and civics instruction, as well as learning study skills. Our adult secondary education program continues to assist students in completing their high school diploma or equivalency. The number of students served continues to increase year over year, as well as our graduation and completion rate. In fact, we just graduated another student yesterday. Adult education continues to be a strong support for creating opportunities for equity in our district. And now I would like to turn it back over to Dr. Woodward, who will speak to school site updates.
Thank you, Dr. Corbis. So exciting what we're doing for the work of supporting our adults. Just congratulations to the adult who graduated yesterday. Great news. I'd like to introduce two of our secondary principals who will share with you about the work that they are doing at their sites to foster diversity, equity, and inclusive practices. First, you will hear from Mr. Butterfield, the proud principal of Amador Valley High School, and then from Ms. Caroline Fields, the principal of Hart Middle School. Mr. Butterfield, it's your turn.
All right, thank you, Dr. Woodward, and thank you for allowing me to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing over at Amador Valley. First and foremost, our priority as any school is to make sure that we have a safe, welcoming environment for all students, and to ensure that all of our students feel celebrated and welcomed, and their diversity is celebrated on our campus. Some of the work that we've been doing specifically around celebrating equity and diversity at Amador is with our students. We had an equity summit last year where we invited all of our student clubs leaders, and the club leaders that specifically represented different ethnic groups, race groups, and culture groups on campus. So that discussion was facilitated by a group of teachers and administrators, and we actually had some guest speakers at that also. And the purpose of that was to help collect our student voice, to hear what their experiences were on our campus, to make sure that students are heard and seen on our campus, so we can help understand the student experience as we made plans going into this school year. We continue to engage in those conversations with different student groups, and we celebrate diversity on campus through our Donversity Week in the spring and various programs throughout the year. For our staff, last year we started with some informal equity chats with teachers. These were after-school voluntary chats around identifying gaps in our programming and practices around campus. That group has now become a formal committee on campus, an equity task force, if you will. And that group is tasked with analyzing data on campus around grades, around student enrollment in programs. Dr. Nugent mentioned a little bit of the work that we're doing within our computer science and STEM pathways to ensure that we are, that all students are seen in our programs. We're examining practices on campus with our staff that Director Graywell mentioned earlier around grading for equity, and keeping a close eye on site data to identify areas where we need to improve on how we serve and support all of our students here at Amador Valley. Part of our school site process is our WASC accreditation, and we have site goals, and we have for 3 years now, around closing the achievement gap of our students and ensuring that our practices and policies are supportive for all of our students here. As a principal and as an administrative team, we're participating in the cultural proficiency book study and grouping and support that's provided through Dr. Woodward's division to expand our capacity as school leaders and ensure that we have the tools that we need to address problems. And I mentioned earlier our Safe Campus for All, but really a big priority has also been working with our admin teams at the high school to make sure that our response to insensitive comments or anything that is brought to our attention on our school site is dealt with quickly, that we respond efficiently, not only in terms of following PUSD policies, but also incorporating restorative practices to help bring people in for conversations to help educate our students and help prevent recurrences of any sort of insensitive behaviors on our campus. So we're really proud of the work that we're doing here at Amador Valley. We're really proud of our staff and students and for their participation in the work around equity here.
Thank you, Mr. Butterfield. Lots going on at Amador Valley High School, so we appreciate the update. So Ms. Fields, passing to you now. Ms. Fields, I think you're on mute.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Dr. Woodward. And thank you, Josh. That was a great update. All those things happening, exciting for you guys. At Heart, we've been looking at equity for some time. This year, we have established an equity staff cohort. This group is reading a great book, Not Light, But Fire, as part of our group discussion in order to improve equity for all of our students on campus. This is our second year of having a staff grading cohort, so a group of teachers, which has been instrumental in leading the school-wide dive into some of our grading practices, as mentioned earlier in this presentation. Last year, when we were in remote learning, we did an all-school community book read, and we picked a book on empathy. And the name of the book was The Insignificant Life of a Cactus. This year, we are going to be doing another spring community book read, which will be incorporated into what I believe is our 9th annual Diversity Week. During our Diversity Week, we do a lot of lessons on equity and building a community at heart. This year, as we come back to campus, we are hosting a variety of clubs and clinics to help students make connections with each other and to foster a respect. Recently, we have started to have on Wednesdays, we have a student cohort after school to help our emerging bilinguals in the areas of math and science and to help them make connections on campus. We also have after school most days a homework club, and that is open to all of our students, again, to help them be more successful at school. As part of our access period, we have a student book club going on right now. It's an extension and are having guided discussions with students about a book called A Good Kind of Trouble. So we have, I think, about 30 students signed up and reading that book with some teachers. When incidences at our campus do rise that are with racial or demeaning comments, we take that very seriously and incorporate restorative practices to make it a teachable moment, because we don't want this to happen again, and students to learn from what happened. At Heart, we are also committed to providing all of our students an equitable and environmentally safe experience with Husky Pride. And our pride stands for positivity, respect, integrity, determination, and empathy. And really proud of some of the work we're doing, but we have more work to do. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mrs. Field and Mr. Butterfield. So in talking to parents that are on the call, if your child ever needs help, please reach out to your child's teacher. We know they have many if they're in the middle school or the high school, but reach out to your child's teacher. You can do that via email, or you can go to the school and go into the office and talk to the office staff about how you would reach out. Or contact the principal or vice principal. We always ask that you start with the teacher first, or the counselor at the school. Our goal at every school in this district is to serve our students well and to be attentive to the needs of our families. So if you find yourself in a spot where something your child says that they were called a name, or there's some sort of a situation going on at school and you're not quite sure that it's been handled, please feel free to reach out. We want you to be able to speak up so that our staff can investigate. So now I'd like to hand off to our Coordinator of Equity and Access, Soraya Villaseñor, who will talk about our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Woodward. You know, what we're doing now, it's to further inform and guide our work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as DEI. PUSD will be forming an equity task force. The work of our task force will be anchored in our guiding principle. PUSD believes in creating safe, caring, and mutually respectful environments where all students, staff, and parents are honored and valued for their diverse cultural backgrounds, identities, abilities, and strength. Therefore, we have a responsibility to commit time, energy, and resources to develop an equitable and inclusive environment for all of our students, parents, and staff. PUSD's DEI task force will serve as an advisory body to the superintendent and will advocate for our community at large. The task force aim will be to provide stakeholders with support, guidance, and information to advance equitable practices in our district overall. For the 2021-2022 DEI task force, we are seeking 18 to 24 members of diverse backgrounds. PUSD students, teachers, staff, administrators, community members, and parents are all encouraged to apply. So the central areas of focus for our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Task Force, our DEI, is 1, to learn about educational equity and become a district ambassador for educational equity and equally high outcomes for all students. To promote inclusion and equity for all members within our Pleasanton community. to review and analyze district data to uncover inequities and assist with informing policies, practices, protocols, or processes recommendations, to provide support in identifying, reviewing, and implementing equitable systems for curricula priorities and efforts that best support students, staff, parents, and community members in PUSD. And lastly, to develop an ongoing equity action plan. Everyone who is interested will have an opportunity to participate in this very important work. We have planned to elicit feedback from the wider PUSD community, and your insights will be an invaluable part of our process. Applications for anyone interested in joining our DEI task force will be shared with the PUSD community on December 1st, 2021 through our eConnect, our bulletin to the board, and will be posted on our website as a quick link on our equity homepage. We look forward to having many applicants. We look forward to creating this DEI task force and doing this very important work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Woodward?
Thank you so much for that. So as mentioned earlier in this meeting, this town hall was intended to give you more information and to engage in some initial conversations. As Coordinator Villaseñor just stated, we will have many additional opportunities to engage together. We will hold not only our diversity, equity, and inclusion task force meetings, but we will be holding meetings with various groups of stakeholders, including students, staff, and families. So we hope to engage personally and sometimes in person as well to have these discussions. But we would like to ask for your questions right now and for your feedback. And this will help us as we move forward in the planning process. So at the bottom of your Zoom link, you should see 3 dots, and in those dots is a Q&A. I believe that's how it's structured, at least that's how it looks on my screen. So if you have a question that you'd like answered, please feel free to reach out and write a question there. As well, if you're interested in being invited to future meetings, and you would like to be someone that we make it a point to send our emails to at all times, just in case they get missed and all the other things that we do, we'd love to have you complete the Equity Town Hall Google form. And then you can give us your name and your email address. So you can either click on the link in the PDF that you have, and you can also look at that QR code, take a picture of that, and they'll bring you right to our form. So on that note, let's go into our Q&A and see what kind of questions that we have. Okay, the first one I see is where do you place students with more than one ethnicity? I'm not completely sure what the question is asking in terms of if we're asking how they're marked or where they're placed, but they would be placed, if they're elementary, they'd be placed according to their appropriate grade level. And if they're secondary, they'd be placed according to their grade level classes or their graduation requirements for that grade level. So anybody else who is a panelist who'd like to add in to help provide more clarity there, feel free to do so. And I'm not sure if I answered that question. So if you have an additional question, please feel free to put it in the chat and we can try to clarify.
Dr. Woodward, I think the question was asked when Dr. Van de Kamp was presenting data on performance, and there were the ethnicity groupings were listed there. And I think the question may be asking about students who identify with more than one racial group.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you. And Dr. Van de Kamp, would you like to respond?
I can. We do have data around students who are listed as having 2 or more races. That wasn't part of the information that we shared tonight, though, but that is part of the conversations that we have. We're able to look at students who identify as 2 or more races or ethnicities.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question about restorative practices, and are they leveraged across all sites? I'll go ahead and answer that, and then perhaps Mr. Dialazzo, you can dive in as well. Restorative practices is definitely something that we want to see implemented at all sites. In talking with principals and crafting our SEL goals for the year, We've heard from our school sites that this is something that is happening. I would say that every school is at somewhat of a different stage with this, but we want to continue to provide support and professional development and equip our principals with the tools so that they can really roll this out. And so this is something that is definitely a priority for us. And Mr. Dialazzo, if you'd like to add on to that, please feel free.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Woodward, and good evening, everyone. So I just want to add that we are definitely becoming and are more intentional when it comes to our restorative practice discussions. And with that, it's really about the policy making. And part of the policy making is talking about some of the plans that we reviewed tonight and putting that specific and explicit information about restorative practice and how it really can be a tool and strategies and practices that can lead to alternatives to suspension. So if we think about restorative practice, it's about partially about restoring relationships when students participate in behaviors that are not conducive to learning, and that's what really they're here about. But it's not just discipline for us. It's really about educating our students to think about their actions. And then again, more importantly with RP, is to restore the relationship with the person that they had an incident with, or a teacher or staff member. So I just want to add that, yes, we are definitely becoming more intentional with our training, more intentional with our policy making and putting that information into plans so that when we implement it in terms of practice, it'll just have more weight and more teeth to it so that we can become more consistent district-wide. So thank you.
Thank you. I think you kind of just also answered the other question, which was in order to ensure standardization across all schools with implementing and adhering to policy, how will the district measure school adherence so that variance is mitigated? So some of the things that we do to be able to help with that is we do review our discipline rates or referral rates. That will provide us with knowledge that is database to know where we need to intervene and provide additional support. So I'd also like to ask Principal Butterfield to share a little bit about how this is navigated at the site level. So if you don't mind sharing with us what you do at Amador with restorative practices, that would be helpful.
Well, yeah, I think that last question was pretty relevant. So I can tell you, for example, when we look at our discipline policy that for the high school, I'll just talk about high school specifically. We work closely with Mr. Dialazzo's division when we develop that discipline policy to make sure it's adherence to board policy, ed code, but also that printed policy that all of our high school students receive from both high schools is something that we collaborate on, our administrative teams from both school sites. And within that discipline policy, we outline where it's appropriate to use some restorative practices. And so, when we're dealing with student behavior, our goal is to address and change that behavior so it doesn't reoccur, right? Like we know that our young people, as they're developing, there's going to be some bumps in the road, there's going to be mistakes along the way, but our job is to help educate them and change that behavior. So when there's, for example, conflicts between students, there might be some consequences based on board policy, but then there's also the piece where we want to bring those students together and try to restore that relationship, like Mr. Dialazzo was saying. So we also have restorative practices around substance abuse. For example, we have restorative practices, we're talking equity tonight. So anytime there's insensitivity on our campus, we want to make sure that we help educate our students and help them right that ship before they leave our schools and they enter the world where some consequences might not be as restorative at that point. So our goal is to help students learn and help behaviors to stop.
Thank you so much. So one of the books that we've been reading is this book here. I don't know if you can see it, Cultural Proficiency. And it's a manual for school leaders. And in this book, it talks about the importance of having that inside out reflective journey where we examine our own practices, our own biases, and the power of our words. And so when we think through this, and if you haven't read this, I would love to encourage you to buy this book. And also, here's another great one that you might like to purchase. This is Grading for Equity. So two of my favorite books, here you go. Amazon has them, and hopefully you can get them at other bookstores as well. But in getting back to this question, is when we can engage in restorative practices, it helps the person who has offended understand the piece of their behavior or their words or their actions that cause pain for someone else, and to be able to provide an opportunity for them to make restitution. And that is very, very important in order to help others to go through the journey of becoming more culturally proficient and sensitive. So I see two other questions. Will there be math supports available in addition to English? From past district assessments, there always seems to be a vast difference in achievement in this area for students of color, especially during the elementary to middle school transition. Excellent question. We have released our first round of ELOG site grants, and some schools are indeed going to be supporting that. You could hear from Mrs. Fields how she talked about they're offering homework help and other support for emerging bilinguals in part of their Wednesday cohort program. We also will be taking some possible partnerships with outside tutoring companies to our Board of Trustees meetings for possible approval on November 18th, which would serve our schools that are identified as CSAE schools, Hearst, Valley View, and PMS, with tutoring after schools by qualified tutors. And this can include mathematics for all of the schools, and especially at the middle school, which would be PMS. So continuing to work in that as well. I know that at Amador and Foothill, the homework help has started with peer tutoring, and we're continuing to look to expand our interventions.
Dr. Woodward, can I add on to that if that's okay?
Absolutely.
At the elementary level, we realized this was a deficit within our program, and recently at the last October board meeting, we actually approved Number Worlds, which is an intervention math program. It's already ordered and on its way. Next steps will be for teacher training, and then schools will be able to implement that. We have quite a robust reading intervention program, and so our goal now is to match that with math as well, which will help the elementary to middle school math pathway.
Absolutely. We're very excited about Number Worlds. So can't wait till that gets here, we can start using it. Okay, looks like we have, let's look at our chat and see what else we might have to answer. What plans do we have for recruitment of a more diverse staff? Mr. Hernandez, might you help us with that answer, please?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Good to be here and good to see everyone. So we are always looking for the most qualified and well-qualified credentialed teachers and staff. That in mind, we are also looking to diversify our staff. They're not mutually exclusive. We are looking for both. So as we look at our candidates who are coming in, we definitely have recruitment fairs that we attend to, and then now in COVID world, they tend to be in virtual world. But again, number one, the most qualified, the best qualified for our students, but also keeping the eye on diversity for our students as well as our community.
Thank you, everybody, for your questions and your engagement. We do hope that you will please complete the form that is linked here and give us additional feedback. I do see one more question that just came in about explaining grading for equity in further detail. There is a concern, and understandably, I understand that some parents may feel this way, that it might actually lower expectations when actually it is intended to increase expectations and increase mastery and learning. So we do have a reputation of students exiting PUSD well prepared for four-year colleges. And we don't want to, the question is, will this make it a less stressful and competitive learning environment? So let's see if we can answer that, so we can put your mind at ease that that is not a direction we want to go. We want to continue to grow our world-class reputation in PUSD while really focusing on the learning. And Director Graywell, if you don't mind stepping in and just bringing some closure to that questions, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you for that question. Yes, the goal of Grading for Equity is not to water down the curriculum or the standards. It's actually to ensure that what students are being taught, that the grades are actually reflecting mastery of those standards, as opposed to a variety of things that sometimes enter grade books, like extra credit points or points for not using the bathroom or points for bringing in a box of tissue and that kind of thing. So the grades are meant to be accurate and reflect students' mastery of standards. They're meant to be motivational, so students are intrinsically motivated to learn and not be just seeking out points, because that isn't a good motivator for lifelong learning. And they're also meant to be bias resistant, so that we're not rewarding students for the privileges they come to us with, but actually ensuring that all students are given the opportunity to succeed. So the work that we're doing with Joe Feldman, he's a researcher, Stanford, Harvard grad, has done a lot of work with a lot of districts around the country in this area. A lot of research has been collected. So we feel pretty good about that partnership with them to help ensure that our students have equitable outcomes, particularly with regards to grading. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll be able to take one more question and then we will honor our time. And this question is, as part of intervention services, how are students identified and referred, especially at the high school level? Mr. Butterfield, could you let us know how that goes at Amador, please?
Sure, I'll speak to that. The intervention and response to intervention in PUSD is we're still in the first few years of our implementation of that. So we have learning and growing that we're constantly doing. So at Amador specifically, we use multiple measures to assess and identify students for intervention. Particularly, we focus on ninth grade, incoming ninth graders. So we look at grade data coming out of math and English performance from students at the middle schools. We look at CASP state testing over the last 2 years with COVID. That's been problematic. And so we shifted our focus over to some of our MAP testing results that our middle schools have been using. And so we do our best to identify students based on the data that they're coming to us with. And we have some intervention classes around math and English with some pretty stellar teachers here at Amador Valley. And then as they move through the high school program, we have a number of different ways to respond, whether it's a SST, a student's support team meeting. We have our administrators and counselors meet every 2 weeks to discuss at-risk students and brainstorm supports for those students. We have peer tutoring after school. We have PTA supported tutoring that's online. So there's a variety of resources that we can offer students when they're struggling, and we're constantly looking at our grade data to identify and provide supports for those students. Can we do better? Yes, and we want to do better. We're always working to improve that. And so I know going into next year, I've already spoken to our two of our main feeder middle school programs, and our math and English teachers are going to meet with the middle school math and English teachers to collaborate and identify the students on a deeper level, not just look at grades. So we want to talk to the teachers who know the students the best and make sure that we're identifying the supports as they enter.
Thank you so much. Okay, on our last slide, here's some contact information. Of course, you can get to our principals through their school website. So I put the members of the teaching and learning team here. Feel free to reach out to any of us at any time. We appreciate you being here. Fill out that form, and we wish everyone to be safe. I think Principal Butterfield has a game he's got to get to on his campus right now, right? What are you going to right now, Josh?
Our girls volleyball are in North Coast Championship playoffs right now, so we're going to go support them.
Okay, go Amador Valley girls volleyball team. I saw that last game, and boy, that was intense, and y'all won. So we hope you bring that home again tonight. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night, and we will see you at our next town hall.